So welcome, Elaine. Elaine is the founder of NutriSci 101, a company that provides nutrition consulting and education. And we're so honored to have her here. She has a PhD in RDN, attended UC Berkeley for undergraduate and graduate studies in nutritional science, earning a PhD in molecular and biochemical nutrition. Wow, Elaine. So she also completed her dietetic internship at UC San Francisco and is a registered dietitian nutritionist. And you've taught classes at UC Berkeley and University of St. Joseph. And your research is most notable for your work in intermittent fasting as a means to lower cancer risk, as featured in The Economist. So we're so lucky to have you, Elaine.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me as we talk about nutrition and healthy living today. Tina gave me such a wonderful introduction. But yes, my name is Elaine Shih. Yes, I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I've taught, as Tina mentioned, I've taught nutrition at the college level and graduate school level for over 15 years now. And yeah, most recently, I've founded the organization NutriSci 101, and with the goal of just teaching nutrition to the community. I really hope that everyone can be aware of how important nutrition is to our health and well-being. Most people in this country eat, let's say, 3 times a day, every day. And so, 3 times a day, every day, every single bite of food that we put into our mouth is a choice that we make. And it's a choice that we can make to help our bodies be healthier or not as healthy. And so that's what I think is so important and empowering about nutrition is that we are in control. And it turns out that 80 to 90% of chronic diseases can actually be prevented with a healthy lifestyle. And so this healthy lifestyle encompasses many things, including exercise, which I see on the schedule that there was an exercise class this morning, so I hope you were able to attend that. It includes not smoking, and of course, it definitely includes good nutrition. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go over general nutrition guidelines that can help maintain our health and help prevent chronic diseases. And I'll talk a little bit about the reasons behind these recommendations. Um, and so, I'm sure everyone's aware by now, the way Zoom is it can be, if multiple people are talking at the same time, you can't really hear anyone. So I think because of that, we're just going to keep everyone on mute for now while I'm talking. And then we'll hopefully have some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have some questions as we go along, um, you know, feel free to jot them down and we'll definitely try to get to them at the end. And so, with that, let me share my screen. Sorry. Okay, so I hope everyone can see that. So let's get that started. Okay, so we're going to talk about healthy living and nutrition today. Okay. So, right now, the current nutrition guideline of the best way to eat is this, which is something called My Plate. And if you remember the food guide pyramid, that was the kind of the older recommendation. That's actually the model that I learned when I was in school. But back in 2011, we have changed the recommendation to this, which is My Plate. And the reason for that is many reasons. Nutrition is a science, and so we are constantly performing studies and doing research and just trying to figure out the best ways to eat. And what we found is that My Plate actually has a better proportion of food groups as opposed to the old food guide pyramid. And also we found that it is much more intuitive and easier to follow because there's no numbers, there's no serving sizes, things like that. We look at the picture and we just try to fit our meal so that it matches this picture. And so what you can do is imagine that all of your food for one meal is on a plate. And it doesn't mean that you have to eat all your food on a plate, but just imagine that, if you were to fit the proportions and with the beverage on the side. And so then the plate is divided into four roughly equal sections, which represents fruits, vegetables, grains, and protein. And then on the side, we have a beverage that is dairy. And so what you see is, yes, the four food groups on the plate are roughly equal, but there's a slight difference. Fruits and vegetables take about half the plate, but vegetables are going to be a little bit more than fruit, and grains are going to be a little bit more than protein. And then we have the dairy on the side. And so the purpose of my plate is if we can make sure that we have a proportion like this, for our five main food groups, it helps us ensure that we have all of the nutrients that we need from these food groups. And it also helps prevent us from eating too much of any one particular food group, which is really important too. Um, Now, this way of eating, this My Plate, is actually appropriate for most people, unless you have a specific condition or disease. For most people, it is recommended to eat this way, and for most ages too. So, other than infants, right? But from children up to seniors, it's appropriate for all of us to eat this way. Now you might think, well, yes, some people must need more food than others, and definitely. So my plate is showing us the proportion of these food groups, but it doesn't really show us the amount. So the amount of food, meaning how big your plate is or how many plates you eat, is going to depend on your personal needs. So how much energy do you need to maintain your body? And in other words, how many calories do you need per day? And so the amount of calories each person needs in a day depends on a lot of things, including their age, their sex, their height and weight, and activity level. So, in a very general sense, children would need about 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day. Adults might need about 2,000 calories per day, and then seniors over the age of 70 might need about 1,800 calories per day. And so I'm telling you this number not because I want you to necessarily write it down and try to calculate the amount of calories you eat. Actually, most people do not need to count calories. That's unless you have a particular condition or disease that requires that. Most people do not need to be counting calories. It's actually quite difficult and maybe a stressful thing to do. I think a better way to approach eating and making sure we get enough calories is a more intuitive way of eating, which is to pay attention to the cues and the signals that our body gives us. And so if we pay attention, our bodies, they know when they have enough food and they will let us know. So if we eat slowly, when our stomach has felt like we got enough calories, it will send a signal to our brain letting us know that we are full. And we pay attention to that signal and just very naturally end our meal, even if we're not done with all our food, then that will be enough food for us for that moment. Now, the issue is that it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for that signal to travel from the stomach to our brain to let us know. So you can imagine if you're eating very quickly, right? If we eat really fast, maybe we've already gotten enough calories, but before our brain got the message, we've already had a second helping or a third helping. And that means that we will have gotten more calories than we need. And that's fine once in a while. I mean, I think we all do that. It's only if it becomes a pattern, a chronic pattern, that of overeating, then that can lead to overweight and obesity, which leads to a host of health issues. So what we recommend is just to try to eat slowly and enjoy the food and pay attention to our body's cues. And after we've had our first helping, if we think we want a second helping, we can just take a break and wait 5-10 minutes and see if we actually do still need that second helping. And so what I want to do now is to talk about each of these food groups in a little bit more detail. I want to cover, the nutrients that are provided in each food group, and also within each food group, which ones are the better choices and which ones are the slightly not as good choices. So, um, I'm going to start with fruits and vegetables. And I'll talk about these two food groups together because the nutrients that they provide are quite similar. Um, they both provide a lot of vitamins and minerals. And for example, vitamins A and C and E, folate, many different minerals like potassium and magnesium. And so, vitamins and minerals are basically things that our body needs to function, but that our body cannot make. And we have to get these things from food. So, vitamins and minerals are essential things that we must get from our food. And fruits and vegetables are packed with vitamins and minerals, and that's why one of the reasons why everyone tells us to eat more fruits and vegetables. And there's another reason, which is fruits and vegetables contain antioxidants. And so you may have heard this term before. Antioxidants are a type of phytochemical, and phyto just means plant. So it's a type of chemical that's found in plants. And it's a relatively new discovery that scientists are learning that antioxidants help make us healthier. They help prevent heart disease and certain types of cancers. And there's a school of thought that it can help slow down even the process of aging and age-related deterioration. And so there's different types of antioxidants in plant food in different classes. And so these different types, they actually cooperate. They work together. It's a synergistic relationship. And so what we would want to do is to try to eat all the different types of antioxidants. And but here's the thing, even scientists, we have not discovered all of the antioxidants that are in fruits and vegetables. We haven't discovered all of them. And so the best thing we can do is to try to eat a large variety of fruits and vegetables. So try to eat a large variety, and then that will help us make sure that we eat a large variety of antioxidants. And in particular, we want to pick the fruits and vegetables that are very brightly colored, and especially try to eat all the different colors. And so try to eat the rainbow. And so the reason for that is the pigment that gives fruits and vegetables their colors, particularly their bright colors, that pigment in itself is already the antioxidant. And so what we want to do is just try to eat all the different colors. So for example, try to make sure that you get, some red strawberries, some orange sweet peppers, some yellow onions, green spinach, some blueberries, purple eggplant. And so, I mean, maybe it's hard to fit it all in one day, but maybe in 2 days or 3 days, try to hit all the colors. And when we go to the grocery store, definitely zone in on the brightly colored, really pretty ones, and try to eat the rainbow. Oh, sorry. That's not where I want it to go. Aha, okay. Okay, so we've talked about fruits and vegetables providing vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. Another thing, very important nutrient that fruits and vegetables provide is fiber. And fiber is really important for our colon health, right? The health of our large intestines. It helps us possibly prevent colon cancer and helps prevent constipation. And so the reason why fiber is so good for our colon is really interesting. So fiber is something that we do not digest nor absorb. So it's kind of weird that something that we don't even digest is so important for us. And the reason is because, so you eat this fiber, you don't digest it, and it goes into your colon. And what it does is it provides bulk to our stool. It makes our stool bigger. Just really simply, it makes our stool bigger, and that's good for us because it helps us have an easier bowel movement. So imagine your large intestine being a tube, And then the stool inside the colon is, you know, like a pebble. Okay, so if this pebble is really small, or a bunch of small pebbles, you can imagine it's quite difficult for the tube to try to push these pebbles out. Okay, so that would cause straining, constipation, hemorrhoids, all of those things. Now, on the other hand, if a lot of fiber was eaten, then this pebble is no longer small. It's big now, so like a big rock. And if you're trying to push a big rock out of a tube, you can imagine that that's a lot easier. And so that's the role that fiber plays. And and it helps make the the bowel movement easier, and it also decreases the amount of time that the stool spends in our colon, meaning the transit time is faster. So we want stool to come out faster. We don't want our stool to spend a whole lot of time in our colon because, I mean, it is toxic, right? This is waste that we're trying to get out of our body. So we don't want it hanging out next to our colon cells as, a lot. So if we have more fiber, we can push out the stool faster, and helps. It can help protect our colon from colon cancer. Another thing is in our colon, or in our large intestine. I use these interchangeably. Water is actually absorbed in that organ, okay, in the large intestine. That's where a lot of water is absorbed. So if the stool spends a lot of time in the colon, it's just going to get drier. The longer the stool stays in the colon, the drier it gets, and then the more difficult it is when you're trying to push it out. And so again, leading to constipation, hemorrhoids, all of those things. And so that's why, in terms of preventing constipation, fiber is important, and also staying well hydrated is also really important. So another thing that fiber is important for is for weight maintenance. So as I said earlier, fiber doesn't provide really much calories at all, but it provides bulk. And that also pertains to the bulk in your stomach when you're eating. So when you're eating a lot of fiber, it makes you feel full because your stomach feels distended, but the amount of calories you're getting is less. And so if you're trying to maintain weight, it's important to eat a lot of fiber. And so those are the important nutrients that fruits and vegetables both provide. Now, there's a huge difference between fruits and vegetables, and that is that fruits contain sugar, whereas vegetables contain almost no sugar. And that's the biggest difference between the two. So fruits contain sugar, which means that fruits will provide energy or calories, and it's a type of carbohydrate. So any food that breaks down into sugar is considered a carbohydrate. And so I say this not to imply that fruits are not good for us. It's also a very healthy part of our diet. What I mean to clarify is that fruits and vegetables are not interchangeable. So you can't, well, you can, but it's not advisable to fill up half your plate with fruit and no vegetables, because then the balance is off. It would be too much sugar. So make sure that half the plate is fruits and vegetables, but more vegetables than fruit. And also keep in mind that everything that I've said so far pertains to fruit and not fruit juice, because fruit juice has had the fiber removed, and so it's not as good. Okay, let's move on to grains. So the main nutrient that grains provides is starch. And so starch is a nutrient that breaks down into sugar in our bodies. And so that's why grains is also a carbohydrate. It gives us calories and energy. Grains also provide different types of B vitamins and some minerals. And so the types of grains would be, rice and bread, pasta, oatmeal, noodles. And there's also another type of food that we consider grains in the nutrition world, and that is starchy vegetables. So these starchy vegetables are corn and potatoes and sweet potatoes. And some people might consider these vegetables, and maybe from a I don't know, botanical sense, it might be a vegetable. But in terms of nutrition, we do consider these starchy vegetables as grains, and that is because they provide starch. So they're different from regular vegetables. And again, not to imply that these are not healthy foods, they are also healthy. but we just want to make sure we put them in the correct place in the my plate portion. So imagine if you were eating potatoes and you considered them vegetables, even though they're actually starchy vegetables. Let's just say you didn't do that and you forgot, you put them under vegetables, and then under grains, you put a different grain like rice. Well, then the total amount of starch is more than the recommended amount. So that's why it's important to recognize that corn, potatoes, and sweet potatoes are actually starchy vegetables, and we consider them part of grains. Now, I know in general, grains are getting a bad rap nowadays. A lot of people are afraid of eating too much carbs. You know, they don't want to eat too much pasta, bread, stuff like that. So I would say grains are still an important part of a healthy diet. Um, we just need to make sure we eat them in the correct proportion. So if you eat them in the my plate proportion, you can see that it really limits the amount of grains that you're eating. It's generally a little bit more than 1/4 of your plate. And so if we control it that way, then we're not going to be overeating. And maybe something about grains, it's easy to overeat. But if we keep it in this proportion, we don't need to worry about that. And also, we want to pick the grains that are better for us. And those would be whole grains as opposed to refined grains. And so whole grains would be stuff like brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, as opposed to refined grains, which would be white rice, white bread, white pasta. And so the difference is that when whole grains are turned into refined grains, the fiber is removed, and well, the bran is removed. So that would mean that the fiber is removed along with a bunch of vitamins. And so we've already talked about why fiber is important for our colon health and for weight maintenance. In the context of starch, fiber is actually extra important. And that is because, as I said, starch breaks down into sugar in our body. And what fiber does is that it slows down that process. It slows down the digestion and absorption of starch. And so then what it does is when this sugar is absorbed into our bodies, it is absorbed slowly. So then our blood glucose or our blood sugar levels go up in a slow, even way, and then it comes down in a slow, even way. And that's what we want. As opposed to if you eat a huge plate of refined grains, like a huge plate of pasta, um, then it's going to be digested and absorbed very quickly. It's going to hit the bloodstream very quickly. The blood sugar or blood glucose spikes, insulin spikes, and that's not what we want. And again, once in a while, it's fine. I'm talking about chronic habits. So if we eat like that all the time, it can actually increase our risk of diabetes down the road. And so fiber is really important to help slow down the digestion and absorption of starch. And so definitely when we're looking at grains, try to pick the whole grains over the refined grains. Okay, so now let's move on to protein. Okay, so protein as a food group is also really important because we are actually protein. We're actually made mostly out of, uh, our skin, our muscles, our organs. They are basically protein. And so you can imagine when someone needs to grow, like a child needs to grow, um, they need to eat protein to add mass to the body. And even for grown-ups, for adults, we need to eat protein because our muscles and organs, they are actually constantly turning over. So the proteins in our muscles and organs are constantly being broken down and then remade. And that's just our body's way of making sure that everything is functioning well. That if there's any old protein that possibly is no longer functional, that they phase it out. So we need to eat protein every day to replenish those needs. And protein plays a bunch of different important roles in the body. Um, for example, our immune system requires protein. When white blood cells kill germs, they use antibodies Fortunately, nowadays we hear a lot about antibodies, but antibodies are also protein. So, just to give an example of why it's so important. And luckily, in this country, mostly we get enough protein, and that's true. Mostly, it's not an issue. Um, so, in the foods in this protein group also provide some vitamins and minerals like iron and zinc and a bunch of B12. Vitamin B12 is provided in this food group, and I do want to point that out because um, as we get older, our stomach acid decreases and we can have trouble absorbing B12. And so that's why seniors do need to make sure that they get enough B12. It is one thing that you definitely should check for in your blood levels. And if it gets to the point where your body's just not absorbing enough despite how much you eat, you might actually need a B12 injection. But in general, this food group is very good at providing vitamin B12. Now, when we think about foods in the protein group, I think the first thing we'll think about is meat, and definitely meat is a great source of protein. But there are actually a bunch of other options that might even be healthier. And so those would be fish and other seafood, eggs, tofu, beans, and other legumes. Nuts and seeds actually don't get enough credit. Nuts and seeds are great sources of protein. And so the reason that I say that perhaps these other sources of protein might be better than meat is because the type of fat that is found in meat is saturated fat. Now, if you've heard of saturated fat before, it's probably in conjunction with cholesterol. So, what we know now is that if we eat a lot of saturated fat, it can be associated with high LDL cholesterol levels. And so, LDL is the bad cholesterol. And so, having high LDL cholesterol levels can be the start of atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of arteries, which can lead to heart attacks and strokes and all that stuff. And so, what we can do is try to eat less saturated fat. And saturated fat is found in animal products. So, when we do eat meat, we can make sure that we try to choose lean cuts of meat. And if we see the visible fat, we can try to cut that off and not eat it. Also, skin and organ, that those also have saturated fat in them, so try to cut those out. And then definitely try to eat more of the non-meat protein options that I mentioned earlier, particularly fish and beans. Those are really great food items. Butter and lard, they're not proteins, those are just fat, but I wanted to point it out that those are also saturated fat because those are derived from animals, right? Butter and lard, bacon fat, all of those are derived from animals, so therefore those are saturated fat. So in preparing our foods, we can try to use less of those types of fats. Now, not all fat is bad for us. Saturated fat, not so good, but there's another type of fat that we can find in our food that's called omega-3 fats. Now, these are fats that are actually associated with decreasing LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol, and actually can boost the good cholesterol, which is HDL. And so we want to try to pick more foods that are high in omega-3 fats. So fish in particular is high in omega-3 fats. So it would be great to try to eat fish at least twice a week, particularly salmon and sardines. Walnuts, a great protein food that's high in omega-3 fats. Avocado is not a protein. It's actually just a fatty vegetable. But I just wanted to point that out as a very good source of omega-3 fats. Now, just earlier I was saying let's try to use less butter and lard for cooking. So instead of those, what we can use is more olive oil and canola oil because these are higher in omega-3 fats. Um, Okay, so in terms of protein, there's one more thing I wanted to say, which is there's a class of protein foods that we really should try to eat less of, and those are processed meats. So processed meats would be things like sausages and hot dogs, lunch meats, ham, bacon, salami. So these or sometimes we will call them cured meats. So these meats, they have that signature pink color, and it's because nitrates have been added as preservatives. And unfortunately, nitrates they it can increase our risk of cancer, particularly stomach and colon cancer. And so these are foods that we want to definitely eat less of. Cured meats are also super high in sodium. I'm going to talk about sodium a little bit more later. But in general, these are the less healthy protein options that we can try to avoid. Okay, and so our last food group is dairy. And so the dairy group includes milk and yogurt and cheese, and basically foods that will provide calcium and vitamin D. And so calcium is important for maintaining bone health, preventing osteoporosis, and but vitamin D is also really important because vitamin D helps us absorb calcium. So if you just have calcium but not enough vitamin D, then it's still not really going to be helpful. So the dairy products that I just mentioned are also derived from animals, right? The milk, yogurt, cheese, and so therefore the fat that is in those dairy products is also saturated fat. So we should try to choose low fat or non-fat dairy options. And we are also free to pick non-dairy alternatives for this food group. So nowadays there's a lot of, there's soy milk, there's almond milk, there's a bunch of other milks out there, and they can substitute milk they can substitute cow's milk as long as they are fortified with calcium and vitamin D. So you really want to check the food label and make sure that calcium and vitamin D have been added because there actually are some products out there where calcium and vitamin D are not added, in which case they don't really serve the purpose of substituting cow's milk. So I have covered the five food groups, but there's several points that I want to make, and one is about beverages in general. Since we were on the topic of dairy and fortified dairy drinks, I mean those are great things to drink, but also we need to make sure that we drink plenty of water. And so typically what people say is drink 6 to 8 cups of water per day, and that is true. But I do find that sometimes it's difficult to remember that. And also, it can vary. Your needs can vary depending on the temperature and your activity level. So, what I find most useful is to monitor the color of our urine. So, if the color of the urine is very yellow or very dark yellow, then it indicates that we're dehydrated and we need to replenish. And and I think that's a really useful way, especially for seniors, as because as we get older, our thirst sensation becomes less pronounced. So we might be dehydrated, but we won't feel thirsty, and so. And it's really easy to forget how much water we've drank. So I think monitoring the color of the urine is a really good strategy. Another thing that I do also recommend is to get some big bottles of water and fill up those 6 to 8 cups in the morning. Just fill it all up, the amount that you plan to drink for the whole day, and then just make it a goal to finish that water by the end of the day. And so that way we don't have to rely on our memory. And I would also say try to drink it more in the morning and afternoon as opposed to at night, which can sometimes lead to a lot of middle of the night bathroom breaks. Um, okay. And another thing I wanted to say in terms of beverages is to be careful of sugary drinks. So, sweetened beverages like sodas and sweet teas and coffees and sports and energy drinks. These are some things that can really make our blood sugars spike. And because they're liquid. Our body doesn't even really need to digest them. And so it's just going to hit our blood sugar and just really make our blood sugar spike. And so, just as I said earlier, we don't ever want our blood sugar to spike that much. We really want to keep it nice and even. So, definitely be careful of drinking too much of the sweetened beverages. Okay. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about sodium as well because yes, you can eat their foods in the my plate proportion, but what if the way that the food is cooked is, really high in sodium, or all the food is actually processed? It still makes us maybe not quite as healthy as we'd like to be, and that is so. It's sometimes it's not just about what foods we put on the plate, but also how it's prepared. How much sodium is in there. So it turns out about 90% of Americans actually consume too much sodium. And this is a problem because sodium is associated with an increase in blood pressure. So high blood pressure can also, damage our blood vessels, cause atherosclerosis, again, the hardening of the arteries leading to, strokes and heart attacks. Um, and so what we can try to do is identify the main culprit of sodium in our diet. And the main culprit is going to be processed foods and restaurant foods. Processed foods, it's just a lot of hidden sodium in there that you may not even realize. And so processed foods are going to be the packaged foods, the pre-packaged foods, frozen entrees, canned foods, and also processed meats that I mentioned earlier, like the sausages and lunch meat. So whenever possible, it's definitely preferable to eat foods that are fresh foods, foods that are cooked from fresh produce. And of course, that may not always be possible. But if we are going to choose some processed foods like canned foods, definitely opt for the low sodium ones. So just take a quick look around at the grocery store, see if you can find those options. Restaurant foods are very high in sodium typically. This is not to say that we can't go out to eat, but if blood pressure is something that you are struggling with, you definitely want to cut that down in terms of eating out. And then when we cook our own food, one obvious is, try to use less salt. But, it's not even just salt. It's other condiments actually have a lot of hidden sodium in them too, like ketchup, steak sauce, barbecue sauce, soy sauce is a huge one. And so trying to use less of those condiments and instead cooking with more herbs and spices and garlic and ginger and flavoring it that way. And yes, initially food might taste a bit bland if we just really cut down on the condiments, but actually our body can adjust to it. So our taste buds can adjust to a lower sodium way of eating. And in a matter of weeks to months, we can actually start um, tasting the original flavor of foods more. And if we then go back to how we used to eat or go eat at a restaurant, we might start feeling that the food is too salty. So give it some patience if you're trying to cut down the sodium in your food. And then lastly, yes, there are some foods that I probably didn't talk about, foods that didn't really fit into my plate. And some people might call these junk foods. I call them sometimes foods because these are foods that we we don't need to cut them out completely, depending on your situation, but we eat them sometimes. And so I also call these empty calorie foods. So these are foods that they provide calories because they break down into sugar in our bodies, but they don't provide a bunch of anything else. So there's no, vitamins or minerals or fiber or antioxidants or protein. So it's just calories. That's why they're called empty calories. So these are sweet foods like cakes and cookies and candy, ice cream, the sweetened beverages. And it's also not just sweet foods. It can be chips and crackers. And so I consider these sometimes foods. You can think of it like if you have, let's just say you eat 2,000 calories a day, then this is your budget basically of how much food to intake into your body. Now if you use a lot of those calories to eat these sometimes foods, then you're not getting a whole bang for your buck. right? You're not getting a lot of good nutrition for the amount of calories that you've spent. So definitely these are foods that we don't want to eat every day. And so those are the general recommendations for nutrition. Of course, if you have specific needs, specific conditions, you definitely want to talk to your physician and your dietitian about your personal needs. But these are the general nutrition recommendations, and I hope that this can help you maintain health and prevent chronic diseases. um, okay, so if I will stop sharing my screen now, and I, I think we just have a couple minutes for questions. I do see that someone asked to talk about a diabetic diet, and so interestingly enough, for if you have diabetes, you can still use my plate, but you have to change the proportion. So the new proportion for diabetes would be half the plate is vegetables, and then 1/4 of the plate is protein, and then the last quarter of the plate would be, your carbohydrate foods. And so I think it's still useful to use that method because it's a visual method, and that's called the carbohydrate counting method. Sorry, carbohydrate controlled method. There are other methods to control diabetes, such as the carbohydrate counting method, which involves more looking at serving sizes and really calculating how much carbohydrate we're eating. So, depending on your particular situation, you definitely need to consult a dietitian for that. I see another question here. Um, the question is about meat alternatives. Um, Processed food or processed meat, my take on it. Okay, so yes, so the question is about meat alternatives. Yes, there's a lot right now, like Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger and things like that. So my take on it is split. Definitely, there's a lot more sodium in those products. They're not perfect. They still do contain saturated fats. Um, However, one thing that they do have on their side is that they don't have animal protein. And so I didn't talk about this, but animal protein in itself is not as good for us compared to plant protein. Um, and so I think it's split. There's good and bad. I think that it can be part of a healthy diet if you're trying to eat less meat. Um, I wouldn't eat it every day. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. Yes, so the question is about eating whole grain pasta and how it feels difficult. And I totally agree that mixing it with regular pasta is a good solution. I think that that is a great solution, and I think that applies to not even just whole grain pasta, but anything that you're trying to change out. So, in my family, we eat a lot of rice, and we're trying to switch to brown rice. And so what we do is we do half white rice, half brown rice, and then that's more palatable for everyone until people kind of get used to it. Then eventually, maybe the goal is to switch to whole brown rice. Um, in terms of meat, I like to talk about that. If you're eating a lot of red meat and you're trying to cut down, yeah, it sounds really daunting. But maybe when you go out, when you eat meat, you can share a meat entree with someone and then share another non-meat option. So a lot of it is just finding ways to step down to where you want to go. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think the all or nothing mentality is is self-defeatist. We don't have to do all or nothing. We do what we can. Okay, is red rice good for you? Yeah, I think red rice is a good option. There's a lot of different rice options out there. And a lot of it is just, what is it better than? It's better than white rice. So definitely. Um, are there any other questions? Okay.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was so enlightening. I will be changing up my dinner tonight.
Thank you. I hope everyone found the information useful, and it's been a pleasure being here with everyone.
Thank you.
No burger tonight, Bruce.
Too late. I've already eaten one.
All right. Thank you, Elaine. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Thank you all. Take care.